The knock on the door came just after sunset, when the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple that made the Wyoming landscape look like something out of a dream. Jack Morrison was cleaning his dinner dishes, the same routine he'd followed for 43 years, ever since he'd built this ranch with his own 2 hands. At 62, he wasn't expecting visitors. He never expected visitors. He opened the door to find a woman standing on his porch, elegant in a way that seemed out of place against the rough wood and dust. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a traveling dress that spoke of money and education. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Jack asked, his hand still on the door. The woman smiled, and there was something in that smile that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Cowboy," she said, her English perfect but carrying the faintest accent. "I came to marry you. I'm the lost Chinese woman you rescued 20 years ago." Jack felt the world tilt slightly. He gripped the doorframe, his mind racing backward through decades, through countless sunrises and ordinary days, until it landed on a night he'd tried hard to forget because remembering it hurt too much. 20 years ago. He'd been 42, still young enough to believe in heroism, old enough to know better. He'd been riding through the Badlands when he'd heard the screaming. A wagon had overturned, part of a small group of Chinese immigrants trying to make their way to California. Bandits had attacked, and by the time Jack arrived, most of the travelers were dead or dying. But in the wreckage he'd found a little girl, no more than 7 or 8, trapped under the wagon's debris, crying in a language he didn't understand. He'd pulled her out, tended her wounds, and stayed with her through the night while she'd called for her parents who would never answer. In the morning he'd taken her to the nearest town, to a Chinese merchant who'd promised to find her family or someone who could care for her. Jack had left money for her care, more than he could afford, and ridden away before he could get too attached. He'd never learned her name, never knew what became of her. Some nights over the years he'd wondered. Most nights he'd tried not to. "Lily," the woman said now, watching his face carefully. "That's the name they gave me in town. I don't remember my Chinese name. I was too young. But I remember you. I remember your face, your voice. You sang to me that night to stop my crying, a song about a mockingbird. Do you remember?" Jack's throat felt tight. He did remember. He'd felt so helpless, this little girl sobbing in a language he couldn't understand. And he'd sung the only lullaby he knew, the one his mother had sung to him a lifetime ago. "I remember," he said quietly. Lily's smile widened, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You saved my life that night. But you did more than that. You gave me hope. The merchant family who took me in, they were kind, but they were also shrewd. They saw potential in me, educated me, sent me to San Francisco, then even to China to learn my heritage. I became a teacher, then a businesswoman. I built a life because you gave me the chance to have one." Jack shook his head slowly. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Lily said firmly. "Most people would have ridden past. Most people did ride past before you came. I learned that later, from survivors who'd been left for dead. But you stopped. You stayed. You spent money you probably didn't have to make sure I would be safe. That kind of goodness is rare, Cowboy. That's why I'm here." "I don't understand," Jack said. "You said you came to marry me?" Lily's expression grew serious. "For 20 years I've searched for you. The merchant's wife told me you'd only left one name, Jack, and a description. I hired investigators, asked questions in every town in Wyoming and Montana. 3 months ago, I finally found you. And I made a decision that would seem crazy to most people, but makes perfect sense to me." She stepped closer, and Jack could see the determination in her eyes, the same fierce will to survive that he'd seen in that little girl 2 decades ago. "I'm a wealthy woman now," she continued. "I own 3 businesses in San Francisco. I have suitors, educated men, rich men, men my adoptive family would approve of. But none of them are you. None of them are the man who taught me that kindness exists in this world, that there are people worth believing in. I came here to offer you a proposal. Marry me, and I'll bring my resources to help build your ranch into something magnificent. Or don't marry me, and I'll still invest in your ranch, because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." Jack stared at her, completely overwhelmed. "Ma'am, Lily, I'm 20 years older than you. I'm set in my ways, I'm not educated, I'm just a rancher who gets by. You don't owe me anything, and you certainly don't need to marry me out of some sense of obligation." "This is an obligation," Lily said softly. I've had 3 years to think about this since I decided to find you. 3 years to ask myself what I really wanted. And the answer kept coming back to the same thing. I want to know the man who had that kind of courage, that kind of heart. I want to build something with someone who represents everything I believe is good about this country. This hard land that took so much from me, but gave me you. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden bird, carved and worn smooth with age. Jack's breath caught. He'd made that for her during that long night, whittling it from a piece of scrap wood to distract her from her grief. I've carried this every day for 20 years, Lily said. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's light. You are my light, Jack Morrison, and I want the chance to be yours. Jack looked at this remarkable woman, this survivor who'd turned tragedy into triumph, who'd crossed half the country to find a man who'd been kind to her once upon a time. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing that had ever happened to him. I don't know anything about running a big operation, he said finally. I don't know how to be the kind of man a woman like you deserves. Lily smiled, and this time it reached her eyes fully. Then we'll learn together. I don't know anything about ranching. You don't know anything about business at the scale I work. But I know you have integrity and kindness and courage. That's a foundation worth building on. The courtship that followed was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Lily rented a room in town and came to the ranch every day, learning the work, sharing meals, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Jack found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing dreams he'd thought long dead, listening to her stories of San Francisco and China and the world beyond his isolated valley. The townspeople gossiped, of course. The age difference, the cultural difference, the sheer strangeness of it all gave them plenty to talk about. But Jack and Lily didn't care. They were discovering something neither had expected. Genuine love, built on respect and admiration, and a connection forged in tragedy but tempered by time. They married 6 months later, in a ceremony that blended Western and Chinese traditions and left half the guests confused and all of them touched. Lily proved as good as her word, bringing business acumen and capital that transformed Jack's modest ranch into a thriving enterprise. They raised cattle and horses, but also established a trading post that became a hub for Chinese and American merchants alike, a bridge between cultures. More importantly, they built a home that became a refuge for others. Lost travelers found shelter there. Orphaned children found families. Chinese immigrants found a place that welcomed them when so many others turned them away. The ranch became legendary, not for its size or wealth, but for its heart. Years later, when Jack was 80 and Lily was 58, they would sit on the porch they'd expanded together and watch the sunset over land they'd built into something meaningful. Their children and grandchildren, a beautiful mix of cultures and traditions, would play in the yard where flowers Lily had planted bloomed beside the practical gardens Jack had started. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack would ask sometimes. "Giving up your life in the city for this?" And Lily would always answer the same way. "You gave me life itself. Everything after that has been a gift. This, with you, has been the greatest gift of all." The wooden bird still sat on their mantel, a reminder that a single act of kindness can echo through decades, can change not just one life, but generations. That sometimes the people we save end up saving us in return. That love doesn't always follow the paths we expect. But when it comes from a place of genuine goodness, it can transform everything it touches. Jack Morrison had thought he was just doing the right thing that night 20 years ago. He'd had no idea he was planting seeds for a future more beautiful than he could have imagined. With a woman who'd traveled through time and distance to find him, to build a life with him, to show him that heroes don't always wear their rewards on their sleeves, but sometimes find them waiting on their doorstep, years later when they least expect it and most need it.